neat little nifty little project going. We can eventually use this to influence the mind of the enemy to give up and to surrender. We need a place to do this. We got to do this undercover now. So, of course, the military, they love the idea. You know, they love something, throw a switch and the enemy puts down all their weapons and comes up hands in the air. They love this. So the military was sold a bill of goods, and the military was said, okay, you can use the old Montauk Air Force Base. It's dead, it's derelict. Also, some of the equipment you requested is on that base, the old Sage radar. So the base was shut down, everything was auctioned off, but the Sage radar was left behind. And the whole group moved from the Brookhaven Labs out to Montauk. That's Phoenix 2. Of course, they spent the first 10 years, from about 1969 to about 1979, researching pure mind control. They started out by taking the output of the Sage radar, modulating it to special ways that they came up with that Reich had shown them from the weather control process, and combining that with stuff they noticed from the Philadelphia experiment work and the stealth work. And they were hitting these poor bastards with the microwave beam out of the Sage transmitter direct. Sage transmitter transmitted at about 400 megahertz, 406 megahertz, I believe most of the time it was set at. Would hop around frequency a little. It would change in phase. It was pulse modulated. They used the amplidyne concept where you had many stages pulse modulated. Each one pulsed slightly different to build a form in the final stage.
Do you know the specific pulse width or frequency of pulse width?
VRF was anywhere from 10 cycles to about 750 cycles. The pulse width, depending upon how they loaded up the capacitors, the voltage could be varied anywhere from about 10 microseconds to about 75 microseconds. The center frequency was 406 megahertz, generated from a stay-low type function, which was referenced from a zero-time function.
Was there any other modulation on this? Phase modulation, frequency?
There was phase modulation. There was frequency hopping on it. Now, this is as I saw it when I got on the station. I'm first trying to account what our digging and psyching and digging and talking to different people told us was the genesis of this thing. Let's keep all the technical questions till later. Okay?
But let me straighten out the chronology. Phoenix 2, then it would start in 1969?
Yeah, about 69, 70, 71, somewhere in there.
Phoenix 1 went from basically from World War
48 to 68.
to 68.
Now, essentially, the first part of the mind control project was to take an individual, such as Duncan here, stand them maybe 250 feet away from that antenna. As I was starting to go into what the Sage radar was capable of, the Sage radar had a peak pulse power of a half a megawatt. That's in the antenna. The antenna had a gain of 30 dB. So that means you're a megawatt. It has a peak pulse power, effective radiated power of at least a gigawatt. This is nominally a gigawatt. Can you imagine what that would do to people? I think it's amazing that the people are still here today that have been hit with this. It does such things as burn out brains, function, neurological damage, and you look inside of a person's lung that had this done, it looked like the lung is all scarred from the heat generated, and just goes on and on with physical damage done to the body by this sort of thing. They tried this with a number of people, a few survivors, and this sort of thing.
Where they get the volunteers for this?
They were just grabbing indigenous people off the street and throwing them in front of the radar beam, and let's see what happens. That's the sort of nonsense that the government loves to do. So,
Who was in charge of the project at this time? I was covered now.
Mr. Jack Pruitt was in charge. All right.
Along with Dr. John Van Orden.
Any particular agency?
I'm not sure what the agency was. Now, somebody got the brilliant idea, upon the urging of the different people, they got the idea, we're not sure who came up with this idea first. The signal they really want goes through the reflector. Let's take the big banana peel, that's what it's called, reflector, turn around 180 degrees, and put the subjects directly in line with the gain horn feeding the antenna. Lo and behold, they got their results and then burned the people up. The poor bastards survived. They hit them with this signal. But they found out by varying the phase modulation, the frequency hopping, and the pulsing of the multiple stages, that they could have profound effects on a person's mind.
Can you describe some of them?
I think these two gentlemen here could describe them much better than I can. But let's not go into that at this point. Yeah, why not? Let's at this point break from the technical description of the first, what I consider to be the real mind control work that they had done that was successful. Let's go into some of the effects. Mr. Bielik and Mr. Cameron, I think, can do more on this than I can.
But that was the goal in mind control of this whole project.
That was the started goal.
That was the first goal.
Started.
Yeah.
And how many people more or less worked on it all together on the base? Approximately.
That varied.
About 30.
About 30.
Who authorized them to go on the base? Who authorized them, use of the base?
Air Force. The Air Force and the Navy.
Air Force and Navy?
In conjunction? Air Force and Navy work together?
Yep, this was a joint project. There was both Navy personnel in it and Air Force personnel in it.
Yeah.
We even have copies of the orders of the Air Force personnel.
And what was the cover story for the base? I must have had something.
They had none.
No?
It was a derelict base
It was abandoned. It was turned over to GSA as surplus
in 1970.
around 69, 70 when they shut down all the stage radar systems. In other words, there was a non-existent operation. There was no government coverage for it. There was no government payment. There was a surplus base which allegedly had nothing on it. So it was the perfect cover.
Where'd they get the funding?
It was totally private.
Yep.
Private corporations?
Essentially.
It didn't originally come from the corporations. It did in the later phases. The original money came from the Nazis, the Nazi government. In 1944, there was a
That was
raid.
Phoenix 1.
No, this is
No, that wasn't
no,
Phoenix
not
1.
Phoenix 1. This is Phoenix 2 and Phoenix 3.
Really?
Yep.
In 1944, there was a American troop train that went through a French railroad tunnel carrying $10 billion in Nazi gold, which they had found. This has been documented in a movie on the old Patton scenario, in which this train was dynamited in the tunnel, killed 51 GIs, and of course Patton, who was then in Europe, decided he had to investigate this. He couldn't understand how an American troop train in the Western Territory was dynamited in a French railroad tunnel. And he was concerned about the loss of 51 GIs, and also, as it turned out, $10 billion in gold disappeared. That was $10 billion in the valuation at the then existing European prices of $20 per ounce, not 400. The gold disappeared. It turned up 10 years later in the U.S. at Montauk. This has been verified since. And that money, that gold, was used to finance the project initially, and for many years, because the value went up, as the value of gold went up, to approximately 100 billion plus. And they spent all of it, and ran out of money.
That's when they tapped ITT.
And that's when they tapped ITT, who then from that point on funded it, because ITT was owned by a certain German group known as the Krupps.
Okay.
And that was, again, the same Nazi connection. Now, in terms of personnel, many of the scientists, the civilian people and scientists there, were all ex-Nazis who came from Nazi Germany, either after the war was over with Werner von Braun, or were snuck in before the war, as was Dr. Unterman and a few others. But the whole thing was basically a civilian project run by the Nazis with the U.S. government surveillance, you might say. The intelligence community knew what was going on. The CIA monitored everything, as probably did well other government intelligence agencies. But the field of players, if you will, those who actually operated on the base was small, 30 to 50. And the funding was entirely private. At a very later stage, after the whole thing was over, then, I mean, after 83, there was some investigation started by a certain senator from Arizona, I think his name was Goldwater. They couldn't find any trace of government funding, no government oversight committees, no payments of money of any kind, no appropriations, nothing. They went absolutely bananas trying to figure out how a project of that magnitude and that scope could have been funded when there was no government money.
Thing the senator would like to know.
That's right. Pruitt was Air Force. He was an Air Force colonel, I believe.
How'd you get Air Force personnel assigned to a derelict base?
Right. Pruitt had his office in the Pentagon. I found that out through other connections. And he was the basic director through the whole of Phoenix 2 and 3, though actually they had two directors. They had the so-called psychic metaphysical director, which was Pruitt, and they had a hardware electronics director, who was originally Dr. Van Neumann. And after he left, Dr. Unterman took over, Hermann C. Unterman from Germany. And they also had an electronics expert who, through most of the period of time, was a Dr. Matthew V. Zarrett, who came in with Werner von Braun in 46.